Good morning, everyone. BritSimon here. Happy New Year. Happy 2025. I firmly believe that 2025 is going to be a great year for us, despite some challenges, which we will surely have. But it'll be a good year. So fingers crossed for that. And I hope it is a good year for all of you DV2025 folks. What I wanted to talk about today is the CEAC data. And I think I need to do a little bit of an introduction to what that is and where you can see the data and how to use the site where you can see the data and so on. So the purpose of this video is to explain that CEAC data. And I will be explaining some important aspects that we can already see in the CEAC data, but I won't be making projections or predictions for each region yet. I intend to do that in a few days' time, but quite honestly, I don't have time today. So I'll show you the data, and you can then explore the data to your own heart's content and see the various data sources that there are available. Okay. I also will include a couple of very important links in my video below on YouTube. So, below the video, you'll see links to some of the stuff that I'm going to show here, which you'll find interesting and important as the year goes on. Okay. So, excuse my cough, by the way, not shaking it yet. But never mind. We'll get there in the end. Let's see. Let me just take a cough sweep, get myself armed. Okay. Let's talk about the data. So what is CEAC data? The government publish a website called CEAC. I'll show you that website. Let's go there. Let's see, CEAC. Right, it's called the Status Tracker. Hopefully you can see the web page that I'm going to right there. And in that web page, it's possible. Let me just make this bigger. Yeah. Making this quite big. Okay, so you can see that pretty well, I think. It's possible to check the status of any particular case. So let's say on a known case, a case that I know exists, I believe exists, so EU1. So let's say your case number is 2025 AF 000100345, right? What you do is you take off those leading zeros. So if your case was, let's say your case looks like this, your full case looks like this. We'll make it, just for ease of use, we'll make it EU, right? If your full case looked like that, you would take off the leading zeros. And there's a couple of times working with this data when you're going to want to do that. But you take off those leading zeros. The leading zeros are the zeros before the first number, the real number in your case number, right? So you leave in the year, the 2025, you have your region, right? The EU in this case, and then you take off these leading zeros. You delete those leading zeros. So your case number would look like that. EU1, what is it? EU10234. If you're telling me the number, you substitute the last few numbers like that, so that I don't need to know your exact number. Nobody needs to know your exact number. It's not particularly harmful if you tell them, if you tell people your exact number, but nevertheless, you can just keep it private. There's no need to sort of tell me. But to check this site, you would go in there and put your full number, right? Now, I know that case number EU1 exists, so I'm going to check that. You have to go in, let's just refresh this. You have to go in here and solve this CAPTCHA. Which is for me N89NC, and click submit, and the status of that case comes up. There's a few things on here that you'll want to see. Firstly, you'll see this particular case was issued. There's its number. Case number 1 there is issued in AKD embassy. The information here, which you'll see later in the information gathered, firstly, it shows the date the person entered the DV lottery, back on the entry period, right? That's interesting. It's not particularly important. As I've explained before, you can enter at any time of the entry period and you get exactly the same chance, doesn't matter when. And if you want to prove that, you can download the data, or you can look at all the data, and you could see, is there a particular day that has massively more entries than any other? And that would be a clue that it was somehow unfair, but that's not the case. I've done that for every year, and it's not the case. There is no particular day that is better than any other day. So that's the day that this particular entry was made. This status date is the last time that case was touched by the embassy. It could be the day that the visa was issued, or it might have been some later subsequent touch, some sort of update to that file, right? And so it's important, but it's not absolutely conclusive. We don't exactly know what happened on that last updated day, right? We never do. But we know in this case that this case was issued by 13th of November 2024. And of course, why wouldn't they be? It's EU1, right? It's going to be the very first number, and it was issued. Then down in this area, you can see that actually there are two people on the case, EU101 and EU102. So for this, 02 is always the spouse. Well, not always the spouse, sorry, it's the first derivative, I should say. But it would be the first derivative. So 01 is the main selectee, the principal selectee, and then 02 and above will be the derivatives. Could be children, could be the spouse, right? So that's the data that you can see. You see, by the way, there is a slightly different possibility. Yes, for example, this one, 02, was actually updated on 9th of October. So that tells me this case was actually issued in the very earliest days of October. EU1 must have been interviewed in the first few days of October, issued in October, and you know, they could already be living in the USA for all I know. Okay, all right. So that's the data. That's how you check your individual case. And what we have is we have an extremely smart and helpful guy called Xarthisius, who takes all that data. He checks every single case, and he plots all that data into his website, which you can come in and see here. So you see, you can see other years. On the left-hand side, there's a menu here that shows other years. You can look at 24 data or any of the years from before. He's got a number of years worth of data in there, although some of this data he didn't actually collect. I'd collected that data earlier, and I provided those files to Xarthisius, which he's uploaded. So they weren't collected in quite the same way, and there's some slight differences, but you can go back here, as you can see, you can go back all the way to 2013 data. So that's kind of interesting. You can see 25 data, and then you can see some official issuance data, which I'll do another video on at another time, which also is very interesting, but we won't talk about those today, right? So what we're talking about today is the 2025 CEAC data. And then you'll see up here that, let's just go through the page and I'll explain the page. This is the data that he has extracted from that CEAC database. He has already extracted that 11,856 cases have been scheduled so far in the year, and that is up to the end of February. So imagine we're now January the 1st. Any activity that has happened prior to January the 1st will have been captured in the CEAC data. So that's any case that has been issued or refused or whatever else, if they've been interviewed already. But it's also cases that are scheduled for interview in January and February, because those cases would have been scheduled in November and December, right? And so we already know what cases are coming in terms of what's scheduled data, okay? Now in here, the number of cases is shown in parentheses, and the number of people on those cases is shown in the number above. What you may understand, hopefully you understand, is that every case number is the case number for that principal winner and any derivatives on that case. And so we have a total number of people of 24,824 people scheduled. We have out of the 11,856 cases. And you can see that breakdown by region here. So AF, AS, EU, you can see the breakdown by region to see the number of cases that have been scheduled so far and the number of people, right? You can also see the number of people issued. So this is issued people. Nearly 8,000 people have already got their visas. They would have had interviews in October, November, or December. And so they've already been issued. That's great. You can see that some are on AP. Now, AP column is classified as administrative processing, but we know that wording used to mean 221G, which I'll come on to in a minute. But that wording now means that in the CEAC system, that embassy has marked that case has been approved and is going through a visa printing process. So these 217 people are having their visas printed right now, and therefore we consider them issued as well. So we've got just over 8,000, 8,200 almost people that have already been issued so far in the first 3 months of the year. Okay, 221G is a type of refusal, but it is a temporary refusal. It can be overcome. What it means is that the people have been to an interview. They either failed to provide some sort of documentation that the consular officer wants, and so they have to go away and find that documentation and provide it, or they went to the interview and for whatever reason, the consular officer was not able to approve that case immediately because perhaps they want more background checking, they want some extra information from the applicant, maybe the medical isn't ready. There's various reasons why a case can be put on 221G. In some cases, that 221G only lasts a few days or a couple of weeks. It's a fairly quick thing for some people. In other cases, that 221G, if it's background checking, can last months. Okay, so it varies by case. We can't predict precisely exactly what that will be. Although I will tell you that typical average times, for example, of 221G for cases from Iran in particular would be 4 to 5 months. Okay, so it's very typical that cases from Iran and some of the other Middle Eastern countries get 221G because they want additional background checking. And in those cases, that additional background checking can take 4 to 5 months. Okay, that's what 221G is. Refused is a final refusal. 677 people went for their interview, but were refused at the interview for whatever reason. They didn't meet the requirements for education or work experience, or they had lied on their application. They said they were single and in fact they're married, that sort of thing. Or they missed off a child off their application, various reasons. And those cases have been refused already. Okay. Quick sip of coffee. Okay. And then there are ready cases. Now, a case that is shown in ready, and there are 6,600 cases in ready, is a case that has not been updated in the database yet. So it's been scheduled, and it could be an upcoming interview that's going to happen in January or February, but it could also be someone who was scheduled in October, November, December, but either didn't show up for the interview, in which case the case will always stay at ready, or they did show up for the interview, but for whatever reason the embassy has not marked their case. That's quite rare. Normally there is some sort of update to the case after interview. Normally it goes into issued or 221G or refused. But nevertheless, there are some cases where the embassy is, I call it being lazy in not updating the cases quickly. Okay. And then in transit cases doesn't show a number of people on those cases. The in-transit number, and please, I hope this guy from one of the YouTube channels is listening to this, because he completely misunderstands what this in-transit number is, and he purports to be an expert. But the in-transit cases are cases that have had the 2NL sent, but the embassy has not yet marked the case as having been received. The embassy has got the case. The case has been transferred electronically. but they haven't come into the CEAC database and said, yes, we've received all those cases, right? And so it's in transit. It does not indicate, as this bloody idiot keeps saying from, what's his name? I can't remember. Diversity visas are more or something, a silly channel. But he keeps saying that this is an indicator of what is going to come in terms of 2NLs that will be coming in the future. He's completely wrong. His explanations on this are complete nonsense. And it's actually 2NLs that have been sent. The individuals of those 99 cases have got their 2NLs, okay? They know the date that they are scheduled to go to the interview. They have access to their 2NL on the system. They can see their scheduled interview. It does not mean that they're about to get their 2NL sent, which is what this other guy says. Okay, so that's what those 99 cases are. We don't have the number of people on those 99 cases because in CEAC, that simply shows the cases in transit. We don't know which embassy it's headed to yet, and we don't know how many people are on that case yet. But as you saw on the other cases, like the issued, the refused, the 221G, we know the number of people on the case, the number of derivatives in addition to the principal applicant, and we know the status for each one of those. And sometimes, by the way, you can see a case where, for example, the principal applicant is issued, but maybe one of the derivatives is refused. That can happen. Those sort of slightly oddball things can happen. Okay, so that's the main data, and that's really what most people focus at when they look at this data. As we go down this page, by the way, I just want to point out to you, you can download the exact data. Let me just pull this across. Yeah, there. You can download this exact data yourself because Xarthisius makes that available to you. So if you're good with spreadsheets, you can come in here and you can see all of that data on every single case. So you can see, for example, I've got this set up for Nairobi at the moment. I'm looking at Nairobi. But you can have a look at all the cases, and we can see that AF1, for example, is hasn't been sent to any consulate yet. It's at NVC. NVC is the starting status for every case. In fact, NVC never touches any DV lottery case. They're handled by KCC, not NVC. But nevertheless, this is like the starting point. It's like if you've ever played Monopoly, you're on Go. Everybody is on Go to start with. It doesn't mean you've been moved to Go. You're on Go, right? In the same way, everybody is at NVC until they have been scheduled. And once they're scheduled, then we begin to see which embassy they're at. So if you download the data from Xarthisius' site into a spreadsheet in Google Sheets or Excel or whatever tool you have, you can see all of this detailed information. And if you add some filters like I have here, you can focus on a particular status type, or you can focus on a particular region or a consulate that you want to look at, an embassy you want to look at. Various things you can do there. By the way, you can see that I have filtered out none as the status here because those cases are holes. Okay, and we'll talk about holes again in a few moments. But holes basically are gaps between the numbers, right? So let me just put those back in and I'll show you what I mean. AF1 shows up, comes back from the CEAC database with NVC as a status, meaning it's not been scheduled yet. AF2 comes back with none. It doesn't come back from the CEAC database at all. If we go to the CEAC database, let me show you what happens. So where are we? There, right. So if I go in here and I change this to AF1, right? AF1 is a real case. Let me just get a new thing here. So that's VCP, S96, right? Okay. So NVC, which is what we saw on AF1, right? NVC is the status. And as you can see, we know the case number, but we don't have any information here about the derivatives, right? This is what I was just explaining. If we look at AF2, AF2 comes back with as a whole, and a whole means, hang on a second, I'll just show you how the reaction is. CXD. It says your search did not return any data. And it's because it's not a real case. It's not an actual case. No person has that case number. What happened is, if you've heard my explanations before, let me show you the spreadsheet. If you've heard my explanations before about how the draw process works, they draw all the people from, let's say, and we'll come to this in a minute, but let's say so there are 5 million entries from Africa. They randomly mix all those up and they assign them all a case number in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for Africa. And EU is being done separately. That's a whole different jumbled up numbers. And EU gets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. AS gets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Right? They all get the number starting at 1. So in each region, there is a region with a case number 1 or possible case number 1. So we saw EU1, AF1, they're real case numbers, right? But AF2, they got to AF2 after they did the jumbling and the assignment of the numbers. They picked the first 100,000 cases or so, or the first 100,000 numbers, and they start going through those cases. And when they got to AF2, they looked at that entry and they found that it was either fraudulent or the photos didn't meet the specs or something along those lines, and they rejected that case before we actually even had the announcement of the results. That created a hole. That's a gap between the numbers. So we can see that AF1 is a real case and it's at MVC. AF3 is at Kigali and it's ready. But AF2 has nothing in the status there. It means it's a hole, right? And there are more holes than there are cases, which might shock you. There are 30 in Africa, for example. There are 34,080 cases, real cases, out of 89,000 case numbers. So there are more holes in each of the regions than there are real numbers. More people get rejected after the entry when they've been numerically selected as in the first few thousand cases. More people get rejected than get allowed through the process. It's unbelievable, but it's true. Okay, so and I've talked about that before, and I plan to try and help that and try and reduce the number of instances when that happens. But basically, the biggest single factor is probably the photos. People are not taking their photos well enough, and they get rejected because they don't follow the instructions, basically. So anyway, that's a whole, right? So as you can see, there's a correlation. There is an exact link up between the data that we're seeing here and the data that we could manually get from the CEAC system by typing in those numbers one by one. Xarthisius has done all the hard work for us, and he stayed up all night doing it, by the way. He stayed up literally all night doing this, so I appreciate his efforts very, very much. Okay, so for an MVC case, we don't have any numbers of derivatives, but you can see for the other cases, we have the derivatives. We know that there are 3 people marked as ready for Kigali, and their status update was on December 31st. So they've probably been scheduled for, I would imagine, a February interview. Okay. You can see the number of people in each of the statuses in those columns there. And this last column here, this last column doesn't actually come from the CEAC database, but Xarthisius creates this data when he extracts the data. So he's marked this as the 2NL date. He calls it the 2NL date. All the cases extracted on January the 1st, which is the first time we see the CEAC data, are marked with a January the 1st 2NL date. That doesn't actually mean that they got their 2NL today. It means they got their 2NL sometime prior to today. But today is the first time we have the access to that data, January the 1st each year. And so they're marked as January the 1st. In the future updates will show other dates will appear in here as the 2NL date. And it's the date that that case received the 2NL or was sent the 2NL. And so that also is an interesting column to look at later on. But right now we've just got that data. Now, that's the data. Let me just show you the website again. We'll go back to the website. That data, that file that I was showing you, is available if you download this data here, right? This CSV file, which you can open up into a spreadsheet. Okay, now, below the initial set of numbers there, Xarthisius has this great graphic that shows us the distribution of cases and holes throughout the whole number ranges, right? Now, let me just tell you, let me show you something here. I'll pull something across. For those of you that can't sort of wait for, you know, for the information to be shown to you, these are the highest case numbers for each of the regions. Okay, 86709. Did I type that wrong? 86709. No, I don't think so. Okay, so these are the highest case numbers in each of the ranges. So for AF, that's the highest case number observed. For Asia, that's the highest case number. EU, the highest case number there. OC and SA, right? So that's important because it is the number of cases, right? So in Africa, there were 86,709 cases or case numbers assigned. And out of that, I can tell you that we have 34,080 cases, actual cases, which means that the derivative rate, starting derivative rate for 2025 was 1.64 for Africa, right? So that means on average, for every one of those 34,080 cases, there are 1.64 people, okay? Which is how we get to the 55,904 people, sorry, 942 people that were selected for Africa. These are the selectees per region, right? This is Africa, Asia, Europe, OC, and SA, and that's North America. I barely talk about North America. I'm sorry if you're in North America region, but I tend to ignore you. So these are the selectee numbers, okay? The number of selectees, including derivatives. Okay, so by a little bit of math, we can see the number of cases in each region, and we can divide the number of cases into the number of selectees we know about from the official data, and we get the number of derivatives per case, which I've just calculated there, right? This is the highest case number, and that tells us then the starting density across the whole range, right? The density is the number of cases per thousand, if you want to put it like that way. So 39% means that in the first or in any 1,000 cases, there would be 390 cases on average, right? Throughout the whole number range. However, the numbers are not, or the cases, the real cases are not distributed evenly like that. There is an increased density of cases in the beginning, and the density of cases reduces over the number range. And we can see that in Xarthisius's data when we're looking at each region. So right here, I'm looking firstly at Africa, then Asia, EU, OC, and SA, right? So if we look at Africa starting density, although it's 39% density overall, its starting density looks to be about, what, 52% or so, right? Something around about 52%, okay? And then it drops down later. It drops down here at about case number 35,000 roughly. And it drops down again a little bit over here. It drops down again. The density drops down. The blue color here are holes. And so in later number ranges, there are more holes. The reason that the density comes down like this is because certain countries are limited during the draw. And so they reach a certain number of selectees for that country at a certain number, let's say 35,000. They say, okay, this country, and I don't know which country it is, but this country has got a number of selectees that we consider to be enough or too many selectees already. So any further cases from that country, we're going to discard, right? We're going to reject them. And so that I call limited countries. It is not the same as the accept countries. There is a correlation between those things, but it is not the same as what we see in the visa bulletin as the accept countries. It's a limited country, okay? And it's to do with the 7% cap. There's a a cap of 7%. That the law says that no single country can get more than 7% of the total number of globally available visas for one country, right? And so because of that cap, they limit the number of selectees that they give to any one country. Even though the limit of selectees might be higher than the cap, the expectation is that the cap won't be exceeded because they've limited that country. And so there is a limit imposed during the draw process, which causes this decreasing density of cases. Okay, now you can see that very clearly in Asia. In Asia, we've got two countries which are limited, Nepal and Iran. Okay, and essentially what this data is showing is that after case number 11,000, there's a drop in cases there, and there's another drop which I would say comes at about 14,000 or so. And so what that's telling me is that there is probably no case from Nepal higher than about case number 11,500 or so, roughly around about that number. I'll work it out more precisely later. But there's no case higher than that number in Nepal. I'm not talking about which case is safe for interview, etc. I'm talking about the number, the highest number assigned to someone chargeable to Nepal, right? And in the same way, the cutoff that appears at about 14,000 or so means that there's no case higher than 14,000 for someone from Iran, okay? And then once those two countries, Nepal and Iran, are limited, the density in that region in Asia goes down to about 25, 27%, something around about that, as you can see on average, right? What that means is that the rest of Asia have about 27% of the overall number of selectees in every 1,000 cases, and Nepal and Iran have a percentage which I'll come back and explain at a later date. They have a percentage of cases for every 1,000 that they are the reason that number is higher, that density is higher. So the density for the initial Asia region starts off at over 60% until we hit the cap, or the limit rather, for Nepal, and then later for Iran, and then there'll be a rest of Asia type continuation here. EU shows a similar thing. You can see there's at least one drop there. That might be two drops, but it might only be one. Another one there. There's at least one limited country there, another limited country there, and it looks like there's a third limited country there, right? So there are three countries, I would say, at least, maybe four, that are limited in Europe. There are in Africa, there's one there, probably another one there, probably another one there. Again, at least three, maybe four countries that are limited in Africa. In Oceania, there are no such reductions in density. There is no country that is limited in Oceania, and the same thing can be said of South America. There's no reduction in density. Okay, so that's something that you're learning about density, and it's important. You should try and understand that. It is important. All right. So then, if we look at this other data, we can see there's other colors in here where we can see cases that have been issued, cases that are ready, cases in transit, and so on. Right? We can see the colors here, and we can see that there is less cases, even though Africa is current up to 22,500 and has been for 2 months. There are very few cases in the 22,000 range that have been scheduled at all, right? And that's very clear from the data. So there is a bit of a backlog in Africa, and we'll talk about why. But there is already a bit of a backlog in Africa, right? And the same can be said for EU. You can see it's the number of cases reducing there, and the same can be said in Asia. Okay, in Oceania, there is a reduction, there is a small backlog, but it's not very bad. Oceania and South America appear to be behaving pretty well and moving pretty quickly. Moving pretty quickly is bad news for high case numbers, just FYI. I don't think we're going to see, and I've already produced a video that talks about OC. I don't think we're going to see the cases above about 2,000 getting much of a chance, frankly. Things are already progressing well, and they've already issued quite well towards their cap. Like if we look at Oceania, they already have 187 cases, 187 people issued. Their capacity or quota should be around about 850, maybe 900. So they're already a quarter of the way through, whereas we're sort of 15% of the way through for the country, for the globe as a whole. Oceania is already about a quarter of the way through, maybe 20%. So so when what it means is high case numbers have a risk, and they always do in every region. But in Oceania, the risk of cases at certainly 3,000 plus, is just really very, very unlikely those cases are going to get current. So if you haven't already understood that, I'm sorry if this is news, but watch my earlier video on Oceania predictions. I still believe those predictions were pretty accurate. Okay. Now we can see that we did do a poll earlier, by the way, and the poll turned out to be pretty accurate. Let me just see if Xarthisius left it up. Yes, he did. Bless him. I love it. Love that guy. So some of you may remember the poll and may have seen me look at this data before. And what happens when you ask people to do a poll is that some people follow the instructions and understand what you're asking for, and others don't. For whatever reason, there's always outliers of mistakes in the poll. So when I looked at this data, for example, I looked at EU, I looked at that data, and this is people responding, telling us what case number they had. So when I looked at this data, I saw, okay, we've got quite a number of respondents up to about case number 40,000 or so, maybe 41. And so I was saying, and if you'd heard me before, from the poll, I was able to see that probably we would have cases up to about 40,000, 41,000. And I was right. And what I was saying was I was ignoring these outlier cases, considering them simply mistakes or someone trying to be funny. So I was ignoring these cases, right? And I was right to do so. And the poll turned out to be very accurate for EU. It turned out to be very accurate also for Asia. We have a few people here that say they have case numbers between 32 and 33,000. They don't. Those are incorrect responses. But the cutoff was almost 30,000. And so we can see that the people in this block were right. This gave me a slightly high number, but I then ignored all of these numbers here, and I was saying that we were going to see a case number of around about 30,000 in Asia. We actually have 29,900. So it was pretty accurate. OC was exceptionally accurate. There were no sort of high case numbers reported. People in OC really understood the assignment. And we have cases shown here between 36 and 37,000. 36, 37,000, that's slightly odd. I thought we had some, 3,700, I should say. I thought we had some between 3,700 and 38, but actually our cutoff is at 3804, I think it is, 3805. And so this was pretty accurate, right? So from that, I was able to make a deduction, and knowing that we would have a static density rate, I was already able to publish a video showing my thoughts about where the final cutoff would come for Oceania. So go back and have a look at that video if you haven't seen it already. South America was actually pretty good. I didn't trust South America. I didn't feel we had enough responses here, but actually the reported responses were accurate. So they again understood the assignment. Now, if you want to see someone or a region that didn't understand the assignment, it was Africa. Bless them. So we have people who'd reported receiving 2025 cases up to AF 114,000 or so. Those are incorrect responses, and there were several of them, but those were incorrect. Well, I already knew to ignore those, but I was thinking that probably the responses in this 90 to 94 and 95 to 99 range were about right. And I thought that the Africa number was going to be about 100,000, maybe 101, 101, 102, something in that range, right? It turns out I was a bit wrong. The highest case number is actually less than 87,000. And so the responses here in this range were correct, but all of these responses were not correct. And probably I could have been a bit more distrusting of this data and sort of gone a little bit further that way and ignored these cases as bad responses, just as I did with these cases, right? So the poll was good. I'm glad we did it. Gave us tremendous insights much earlier than normal, and now we have that data actually confirmed. So, so that's really good news, right? Okay. So now you've seen the data. Hopefully you're understanding that pretty well. There is more. There is information about each individual embassy, and this is really interesting. If we come down further down the page and we put in here a particular embassy, let's put in, I don't know, Cotonou, right? Benin. Okay. Now we can see that Cotonou, for example, has cases up to about 20,000, just over 20,000 already scheduled. So they're doing well, right? And they've had 130 cases scheduled so far. That is up to the end of February, okay? So we can also see that they've had 69 people issued. We can see all of that data for the embassies there. There's 130 cases that have been scheduled. 210 people have been scheduled. Out of that 210, 69 have already been issued. 20 people have already been refused, and 21 are on 221G, right? That's just Cotonou. Now, by comparing data from this year to last year, we can see whether an embassy is off to a good start or not, right? So, Nairobi. Let's have a look at Nairobi. Nairobi has 421 cases already scheduled, which is probably a surprise to a lot of people because they probably didn't think there were that many. But you can see that there is a bit of a backlog at Nairobi. They've only scheduled cases up to about 12,000 or so. And then there's one case at 16,000. That's I won't bother to explain how that's happened, but it's probably someone who's moved their interview to Nairobi. But nevertheless, for normal scheduling, you can see that they've scheduled cases, at least 50 cases in each 2,000 block there, and probably an average of around about 65, 70 cases or so. And they got up to about case number 12,000, right? If we look at the last year's data and we look at, well, what we'll do is I've switched the date back to 0101 of 2024. So this is the first bit of data. I've moved the time slice back. This bar allows me to move the time slice forward and back throughout the year with 2024 data. And so we can see by the end, here's how the shape looked, but we can move it all the way back to the first data there. And then we can compare an embassy from 24 to 25, right? So if we look at Nairobi and we said, okay, how did they do last year? Because we want to see whether they are doing better than last year or worse than last year, right? So at this time last year, there were 892 cases scheduled for DV2024 in Nairobi, 889 of them in Africa, and then a couple of people from other regions, right? Including actually one from North America. That's interesting. I have to remember to look that one up. And we can see that at that time, there was around about sort of 60 cases per 2,000, so about 30 cases per 2,000. And you can see that there's this light green and dark green color indicating to me that there are cases that are scheduled, quite a lot of cases that are scheduled. Low case numbers have been issued, but the lighter green color there shows me that there are cases scheduled, and they were scheduled for February and January of 2024, right? So that's how the picture looked in 2024. Remember, 892 cases scheduled. In 2025, Nairobi is only scheduled 421, so less than half, right? And interestingly, issued cases throughout the range here, it looks normal, but very few cases are ready, which means to me they have probably not scheduled anyone in January and February, or if they have, it's very few cases. So for some reason, we don't know why, for some reason, Nairobi started off pretty well for October, November, or December case scheduling. They've interviewed and issued those cases, but they probably haven't taken cases for January or February. I don't know why, but I know that to be, it's pretty obvious from the data. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Nairobi's off to not a great start, not as good as last year. But I actually would not be concerned. If I was at Nairobi, I certainly wouldn't change away from Nairobi. I mean, that would be nuts. You'd have to be a bloody idiot to move away from Nairobi right now based on this slow start, right? So please, I don't want to hear from people that say, oh, I'm panicking about Nairobi. Not yet. That's completely inappropriate to think like that, right? Nairobi is a good embassy and probably will be one of the best in the end, right? Now, let's look at 2024. We can look at 24 and we can sort of check out some of the problem embassies like Addis, for example. Now, Addis started off with 58 cases, and as you can see, on the 1st of January last year, had really not scheduled any cases at all above 2,000, case number 2,000. They got off to a crappy start, and although they improved things during the year a little bit, particularly in the last months, they really disappointed a lot of people. Addis was one of the embassies that I consider to be a bad embassy in DV24, as it was in DV23. And over the last couple of years, I've been wary of Addis because they've just been ignoring people. So how have they started DV25? Let's have a look at that. Addis. Addis has become a superstar. They got 931. Now remember, in this time last year, they had 58 cases scheduled. So far this year, they've scheduled 931. They have, that's 1,436 people. They've issued 465 visas already. They've refused 35, 118 people are in 221G, and they've got up to case number in over 21,000. Okay, so they are close to being not backlogged at all, and they've got a lot of that light green color, which means they've got interviews in January and February that are coming up. So Addis is off to a great start. I had heard rumors about this, and I've referred to those rumors, but I didn't want to confirm that rumor that they're off to a good start until I was sure that I was seeing the data that I wanted to see. People had told me they were scheduled up to about 18,500. That rumor turned out to be wrong. It's higher than that. It's better than that. And you can see that they've scheduled 114 people in the range between 16 and 18,000, for example. So they have become a top performer in Africa, from being completely bad last year and the year before and so on. They have become a top performer. So it looks like Addis has turned around, and I'm thrilled about that. I have to say I'm really pleased about that. Another embassy which is doing very well is Cairo. Cairo has been through a bit of a bad couple of years, but now they're in DV25, they have scheduled 731. And if we compare how they were set in DV24, they had only scheduled 328 at that point. So they are much better than they were last year. And as you can see, their numbers, their number range shows that they have virtually no backlog. So Cairo is doing well. Addis is doing well. Nairobi is not doing quite so well, but I'm sure we'll catch up. Now, let's look at something disappointing, which I have to say I'm disgusted by. Accra. There's a special place in hell for the embassy staff in Accra, as far as I'm concerned at the moment. They have been disappointing people for years and ignoring people's chances and destroying people's chances for years. And quite frankly, I'm sick of it. And if you are someone who works at Accra Embassy, you should be ashamed of yourself. it's a disgrace, frankly, with the number of people selected at ACRA to have only scheduled one case in 5 months is disgusting, nothing short of disgusting. And the fact that that's in the 8,000 to 10,000 range tells me that that was a transfer anyway. So this is complete bullshit. There is no reason why this should be happening, and it is an absolute disgrace that ACRA are doing this. Okay, it's actually worse. It's a worse start than last year, and I didn't think you could get worse. They had 60 cases scheduled by this time last year, and they went on to schedule about 20 each month. And then they had a good July scheduling for September cases. They did 95. That was the only thing that saved some people's asses at that point. But that tells me they've got capacity. So in September, they saw 95 cases. And then for the next 5 months, they think it's okay to just do one case. They think that's okay. It's absolutely disgusting. So ACRA, if you're in ACRA Embassy, I'm sorry, this data confirms that ACRA have decided they're going to screw around with people again in DV2025. And unless they commit to doing an immediate change around of their policy, to putting some effort into DV, then it's going to be a disaster at ACRA. And I suggest you get the hell out of there. You cannot trust ACRA Embassy to do the right thing. I'd love to hear from the staff at ACRA to try and justify this shambles, this disgraceful performance in DV25 or the last couple of years. I'd love to hear from someone from Ghana. And if you'd like to go on video, I'd be delighted to interview you on video to talk about that. Okay, because I've got some words to say. So anyway, that's ACRA, disgraceful. Ankara is another worrying embassy. Let's have a look at them for 25. They've taken 420 cases. How does that compare to last year? Now it's 420 cases for what is supposed to be a big embassy, right? Who do a lot of cases for Iran, as well as for Turkish citizens and Turks and others that are in that region. So they started off in 24 at 433. It's about the same performance as this year so far, but I can tell you that last year's end game performance was not good enough. It looks about the same, actually. There have been 263 Asian cases scheduled, 154 Turks. These Asia cases are, largely speaking, they're Iranians. Not all of them, obviously, but mainly. And so, I'm sure the Turks are sort of pissed off about that. It's, they're right to do so. Again, Ankara is another embassy, honestly, you cannot really trust. Let's have a look at Armenia, Yerevan. They're off to 334. They started last year. Yerevan, Armenia. They started last year a little bit below that, so a slightly better start. It's not conclusive at this point, obviously, but at least it's not terrible. And mainly EU with some Asian cases. So this is Iran, but mainly Armenians. Okay, so so that's interesting too. Okay, all right. So you can see what you can do with the data by looking at this year's and last year's data. Hopefully by now you understand the layout of the data, the distribution of cases, the meaning of holes, something about how the draw process works, and so on. You've learned quite a lot in this session, but you can have a look at this data and see what you think. Now, one of the people in the chat, a guy called Eno, and I'm sorry, Eno, I don't know your real name. So I'm going to only have to refer to you as Eno, which is kind of nuts. I'm sorry about that. And it's not on here, is it? He's not got his name on here. No. Okay, so what he's done is he's taken that data from Xarthisius and he's plotted that out in an interesting way on a spreadsheet here to show us the distribution of cases for each embassy in each region for each 1,000 case numbers, right? This is kind of interesting stuff. So you probably want to come and have a look at this data as well, and I'll include the link in the below the YouTube video. Okay, and what we can see, for example, is Addis. You can see there the performance of Addis that I was just referring to. This is the number of cases scheduled in each 1,000. So in the first 1,000 cases, 1,000 case numbers, there were 57 cases sent to Addis, right, for Africa region. Okay, 35 in the next 1,000, 50 in the next 1,000. So you can see pretty quickly, visually, you can see which are the good embassies. Algeria is doing well. AKD is doing okay, a little bit backlogged, right? They're only at about 12,000. You can come across and just scan across all the other countries. So if we look at Africa, you can see what's happening there. And as you come across, you can look at Cotonou, which I pointed out is doing pretty well. And you can have a look at this data. I think this is worth you looking at as well. Lomé is another embassy that's doing pretty well. They're pretty well up to date with African cases. Okay, so you can see people often ask me which are the good embassies to go to be assigned to. Well, you can look at this data and you can understand. Okay, if you understand what you're looking at here, you'll do pretty well, right? So do come and have a look at this. I'll put the link for this spreadsheet under my YouTube video, and I'm sure lots of people will enjoy and appreciate looking at that as well. Okay, that's about all I wanted to explain today. I don't have predictions for you today. I'm short of time today, so I need to wrap up this video, post it, and get on the road. Yeah, hopefully that was interesting to you. Wow, just realized it's a 56-minute video. I've been talking a long time. So, all right, I'm going to call it a day. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to the channel. If you want to make sure you're properly informed during DV25, you better subscribe to my channel because other channels just don't have it, I'm afraid. Okay, everybody. Thanks then. Bye-bye.